This is our agenda this evening for the session on how to build and grow your volunteer team. I'll share some volunteering basics, then talk about recruiting volunteers, and once you've recruited people, how to keep them engaged. At the end, I'll wrap up with some additional resources. I'm going to start by kicking this question back to this group if you want to type in the chat, but why are volunteers so important? Why do we commit so much time to recruiting and training volunteers? Why are we so thrilled to have your help? Volunteers power everything in a campaign. Yeah, I mean, it's true. Thank you, Heather. Oh, Marilyn, if you want to come off mute, go ahead. Oh, you are muted.
Unmute. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I was wondering if you want us to answer what you just asked, why volunteers are important. Do you want us to speak to you or do you want us to write it in the chat?
Chat is a little bit preferred, but it's okay. And I've got some good answers here, including Sarah Broadwell here.
Well, okay, I will answer there.
Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah, it is, Sarah. We're amongst friends here. It does have a similar pyramid building vibe, but without the scammy financial exchange. So yes. Okay, so here's what I have on my slide. These answers are all great. So building our volunteer teams is critical to winning in any election in this November. We can't do it without volunteers. You know, Daniel and I are staffers, but there's not enough funding, not enough money in the world to hire enough staffers to talk to all of the voters that we need to talk to. So we really do rely on and appreciate all of the volunteers and volunteer leaders like you all who get involved and help us as we look forward to the election in November. And I want to share here. This is a slide I normally only train staff on, but staff does increase as we get closer to November, which is the dark blue line here. This lighter colored line is really the capacity we have with volunteers. Yeah, candidates can't be everywhere at once. So true. And the candidate's time is incredibly precious. But we know that our volunteer capacity increases over time as well. And if you are here and you're a county party chair or you're a precinct leader, maybe you haven't gone through a full campaign cycle before GOTV, get out the vote season. I know for my first campaign experience, I was skeptical of this slide. And I was like, how are we going to do all this work? We don't have all the volunteers we need to do everything. How is it going to be possible to do all this? And then at the last minute, people come out of the woodwork. We are political junkies. If you are here on this session, like we are abnormally engaged, politically minded people. But when we get past Labor Day, when we get into October and it's really hot and heavy campaign season, trust me, volunteers that you never even knew were people in your community are going to come out of the woodwork. So I appreciate that you all are here to get trained up and learn about how to build and grow your volunteer teams. And you're doing this, it's still July. We got August coming up real soon, but it is going to heat up very quickly. And thank you, Marilyn. I see, yeah, all of that work is stuff that volunteers do. There's my thank you slide. I gave my thank you pitch already. It comes so naturally, but thank you for giving us your evening tonight and for doing this work with us. I also want to point out, because this is different than when we're talking about engaging with voters. We know voters have to be 18 by election day, have to be US citizens. When we're talking about volunteers, we really can cast a wider net. So people who aren't able to vote are in fact able to volunteer. And even people who are unable to donate money are able to volunteer. So non-voters, people outside of North Carolina, and there are a lot of eyes on North Carolina this year. Maybe even more if our governor gets elevated here a little bit, but lots of people are paying attention to North Carolina, and we will have out-of-state volunteers who come to North Carolina and like stay in a hotel or with a friend to knock on doors on weekends. We already have volunteers from out of state who are making phone calls with us. Also, people under 18 years old can volunteer, and non-US citizens. When you think about building your volunteer team, start wherever you are. So every county, every precinct, every club and organization is at a little bit of a different point in your development as an organization. So no two programs are the same. This is a list here of tactics that different groups and clubs and counties might do as part of their volunteer program. Probably nobody's doing every single thing on this list. So I just want to point that out so that you don't feel like you have to do everything. As someone who works for the state party, I'm always thinking about the long term. How do we build long-term sustainable power for average people to have a voice in our government? Can't do all of this, you know, in the next 3 months. Maybe can't do all of it in a year, but think about where you're starting, which tactics you do now, and which couple you can add into your volunteer program now, which few you want to add in 2025. Daniel and I are going to ask you to knock doors and make calls. Those are the most effective ways to get people persuaded and get them turned out to vote. So that's really where our focus is. Some of these might be more appropriate for next year versus now. Things like having social events. We're going to be really focused on knocking doors to talk to voters. But there are a lot of different tactics that you might find eventually your volunteer program participates in. So I'm going to put this back to the group chat, but what are some things, some tasks, some programs that you need volunteers to help with? If you want to type in the chat, I've seen a few. Lawn signs, Michael Tucker. Staffers have mixed feelings on lawn signs. We love the excitement and the enthusiasm, and we love door knockers more. Yep, making calls, phone banking. I saw Marilyn put poll greeters, staffing offices. Let's see, what do we have here? Pizza runs. Okay, I like that. I see a direct message from someone who is on my list to call. So let me let me put my email here in the chat because you and I should chat. If you want to send me an email, I meant to get to you today and just ran out of time. So apologies for that, but we're gonna get you plugged in. Okay. Oh, I got a couple on here that didn't come up in the chat. So we said knock doors, make calls, lit drops. So this is where instead of knocking on the door and trying to talk to the person who lives there, we just leave behind literature. Voter registration, which is another one that 2025, I would love to see counties and precincts really focus on voter registration. And staffing events. So we talked about headquarters offices and things like that. So quite a few of those came up in the chat. I have a couple slides here that I plagiarized from my own training. Earlier this year, I did do a training series for precinct leaders, and there were a couple of roles in particular that we talked about that if you are a precinct leader or a county party chair, you might want to think about. Yeah, town hall meetings, staffing events. Thank you. So block captains. A block captain is somebody who really is like, that is the go-to person in a neighborhood who everybody knows that's the political person. If I want to talk Democratic politics, that's the person I go to. They're going to know who's on my ballot. They're going to know people who live in this 2-3, block radius. Maybe it's somebody who walks their dog around the neighborhood every day or something. And really talks to everybody in the community about the election and the candidates coming up. These can be really effective people when we get to GOTV or get out the vote season, where it's really important that the supporters that we have identified make a plan to cast their ballot. Yes, my goal, social media creation and amplification. I got a resource at the end. I'm not sure if you've gotten before, so we'll see. Another role, and this was my private chat going on here, a database coordinator. So I'm not going to really talk about Vote Builder in this session, but I have been doing a training series on Vote Builder, which is the Democratic Party's main database. If you are tech savvy and you are a registered Democrat, there might be an opportunity in your county party to volunteer to help with Vote Builder. It's kind of more of a behind the scenes. I know not everybody is capable or comfortable knocking doors and talking to voters. But if you're tech savvy, and I see you, my friend John, a database coordinator, a Vote Builder administrator can be a good role. A volunteer coordinator. Maybe you are your county or your precinct's volunteer coordinator, and that's why you are here. But I'd always recommend that counties, at least counties, maybe precincts, have a person whose job it is to recruit and onboard volunteers. So sometimes counties have a form on their website that's like an interest form, a Google sheet where you say, I'm interested in volunteering, you fill it out. It's really important when people fill out that interest form that then a human calls them, that somebody, probably the volunteer coordinator, reaches out as soon as they can. If you're a county party, maybe this is part of like your weekly routine. Anybody who filled out that form this week, I'm going to call them and tap into that enthusiasm. And I'll tell you right now, this is a fantastic week to be doing volunteer recruitment. There is a ton of energy and excitement, and people want to know how they can be useful. Put me to work. I hear that from volunteers all the time. So you have an opportunity to reach out to these volunteer leads and say, we have a canvas. Come on out, we'll train you up. Or we're doing a phone bank. You can do it over Zoom or you can come in person. But reach out to these volunteer leads quickly, get them engaged in an event. And that role of a volunteer coordinator. Volunteer recruitment is one of my favorite activities. I also really love making confirmation calls. But make sure that people who express interest get put to work. Someone mentioned events, and Rhonda mentioned town hall meetings. You might have an events coordinator in whatever your volunteer team is. I'm thinking of this a little bit more as like a 2025 thing, given that we have 104 days until the election. But having social events for your county party or your precinct, particularly when it's not super heavy voter contact season like it is right now, in 2025, keeping those connections, keeping that enthusiasm, staying in touch with the people you work with on the campaign this year, for municipal elections, for 2026, but having an event coordinator who maybe schedules social events, maybe you plan a post-election day or an election night event. It can also be someone who helps coordinate and schedule your regular, maybe monthly meetings or quarterly meetings. You have to have a precinct meeting. Now that I started that sentence, I don't know how to finish it. You're supposed to have a precinct meeting once every 2 years at a minimum, something like that. But if you have an events coordinator, that's another kind of behind the scenes role that there might be somebody you can keep an eye open for who would be really good in that role. I created this slide a while ago. We're not thinking quite as much ahead now because now is ahead. Like we're getting into the season. But GOTV, get out the vote season, we're starting to think about that. And this is where we really focus our efforts on making sure the people who do support us, who do support our candidates, cast their ballot. And this is a little bit of a sneak peek of what the volunteer leadership roles might look like during GOTV. We still got a little bit of time. I'm working on the training materials now, so there might be some adjustments, but I wanted you to see what the key leadership roles are that we anticipate needing people to fill for, the last, say, 4 weekends of the election cycle, something like that. Because you should be thinking ahead to who do you know who is doing this work now, who can step into those roles, or do you have gaps where you should focus your recruitment efforts? So staging locations, and there's more to come on this in like by late August, maybe early September, we'll be talking about this much more specifically, but we have a staging location, which is a central spot where all the volunteers show up, get trained to canvas, and then go knock on doors. Someone has to lead and organize that physical in-person site. A canvas captain should be someone who is good at knocking doors and good at training other people to knock doors. I lead a canvas training every Thursday evening. If you haven't had a chance to attend it, pop in sometime and see how I train people to canvas. Now, what I'm doing on Thursdays is an hour session. When it's GOTV, you're going to have 15, 20 minutes. But the more preparation we can do now, the easier it will be when the rubber really hits the road. You might have someone who is specifically in charge of running your phone bank. Your confirm captain would be a person potentially who's calling to make sure everyone who is signed up for a shift remembers that they are signed up for a shift for an event and they show up. And a comfort captain, that's another one of those roles that's a little bit behind the scenes and really nice to have. This is the person who is making sure everybody has had a drink of water and that everybody, here's some fruit. I'm going to bring the sliced oranges, like whatever you need. I know I am personally doing a very bad job right now of taking care of myself and making sure I'm eating and drinking. A comfort captain can really serve that role at a staging location and help with that. It's a little bit of like a den mother kind of situation, but somebody who can really take care of the crew that are talking to voters. Yeah. Yeah, go get the pizza. Thanks. All right, those were some volunteering basics. I'm going to get a little bit more specific now on recruiting, but I want to pause here before I do that and see what questions you all have.
You go off mute for a minute.
Sure, Michael.
Okay, thanks. Did a walk on the weekend in Gaston here. Really awesome. Found a junior marketing student at a local university who said, "Yeah, volunteer." What happens after I put her email and phone number into Minivan? Like, what is the next? Because I didn't see her at the county meeting yesterday, and it was kind of like, oh, that seemed like a missed opportunity. Should I have been, hey, while I'm here, like you should come out, or is that, should I assume somebody else is going to follow up with her to do that? Even given that it was like the weekend and then the county meeting was yesterday.
I'll give you three.
What's the SLAs? I got there's service level agreements on that.
Yeah. So here are my three answers. One is that what actually happens is that information is captured in Vote Builder. And then as the organizers like Daniel or the county party chairs make volunteer recruitment calls, that person should come up in their list as a lead. Also, when I was doing a lot of door knocking, which I haven't been on the doors this cycle, don't tell Daniel here, but when I was doing a lot of door knocking, I kept on my phone a folder of bookmarks that were helpful when I talked to people. And one of them would be a mobilized link for the county party meeting or for the next week's canvas. And I would try to shift them. I would sign them up right then. Like when you've got that interest, I'll be like, hey, look, I'm standing right here. Let me text you, sign up right now. Better yet, let me enter your information for you, right? That's a hot lead. I don't want to let you go. Let me enter your information. You're going to get an email that's going to confirm all the information. Let me sign you up. So I usually do have that handy with me. The third thing I'll say, and I don't know, I don't know if this is applicable in this situation or not, but I don't always find county party meetings to be the most
Oh, that's a good point.
engaging step for a new volunteer. And it depends on the county party. I was previously very heavily engaged in my county party, and those meetings were a slog. I'm not saying that's what it's like in Gaston, like I have no idea, but I would rather get them signed up to knock doors instead of sending them to a county party meeting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, I'm way behind time, so I'm gonna keep going. Okay, recruiting volunteers. Where do we find volunteers? We find them everywhere. Michael just mentioned he was door knocking, met somebody who was enthusiastic, sign him up. Great. We just have like a vendor at our office, and he was like, I've got a little time on my hands. Do you need anything? I was like, oh, I'm gonna have you making, calls to voters. It's kind of a always be recruiting, always be organizing is what we might say as staffers. So volunteers could be everywhere. Like keep your head on a swivel and you might meet somebody who would like to be plugged in. I'm going to ask this group to type in the chat, please. What are some reasons that people volunteer? They want to help Dems win. Michael Tucker is here because he wants Donald Trump to shut up. Appreciate that. Very specific answer. Looks like a couple other people might be typing. Help their candidate, the candidate they support win. Yeah. Gives them a feeling of being seen. That is very real. Yeah. Support the party and the candidates that we're running. Yeah. Here are some of the reasons I've got listed. Passionate and motivational. So what keep Trump out? Yes. Couple of things I have here on the slide. I'll mentioned in the chat. People believe in the issue, the cause, or the candidate. It's fun. I like door knocking. I like being out talking to voters. I love training volunteers. I really enjoy this job. And right now the vibes are stellar. Like everybody's having fun right now. It's an opportunity to be with like-minded people. So I think it was Lori giving a sense of being being seen. I think about this too for our friends in red counties or purple counties. When you find other Democrats, sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. It's a sense of relief. People volunteer to get a sense of accomplishment. You're part of something bigger. Maybe you learn new skills. I know I personally volunteered to be like the database coordinator for my previous county party because I wanted to get better at data. And then also here to solve tangible problems in our lives. I believe in the power of good government, and I believe the government should serve the needs of the people. So solving a tangible problem in your life, that is real. That's what government should do for us. In the chat again, please, why do people not volunteer?
Christy, for some reason, when I try to answer, it says that I cannot chat with you.
Well, I don't know.
Okay, me neither. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I haven't like, I haven't blacklisted you or anything, so, yeah, sorry about that, I don't know, must be doing something weird. Okay, why do people not volunteer? Lack of time, busy, small children, you know what, that's real, yeah. Oh, I'm gonna reinterpret what Michael said here, like maybe they have a poor volunteer experience. Yeah, that happens. Fear of negative encounters, hard time expressing their beliefs. Yeah. Okay. No transportation to canvas. Yeah. And our friends in rural areas where you're not knocking in a suburban neighborhood on sidewalks. It's like you got to drive from house to house. Maggie, yeah, I kind of interpret that as like a nihilism, like we've been beaten down. And that serves the interests of the powerful when we feel like we can't, yeah, apathy, we can't make a difference. System is rigged. Yeah. Retribution. Our opponents on the other side, they gotten real screamy and mean and occasionally violent to each other even. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. So it's right. They do want to intimidate us, and that's why I won't back down. I'm too stubborn. But the number one reason is people aren't always asked. And I like to share the story that I grew up, I spent most of my life in Ohio, which is now pretty solidly red, but was a really important swing state for a long time. And I was never asked to volunteer. And I've always been a little politically minded. And I enjoy this work so much. I wish someone had asked me to get involved sooner. But I was never asked. I didn't even know what the possibilities were to get engaged. So I bring this up because we want to make the ask. We want to give people the opportunity to be active participants in democracy. They might not be able to, but we always want to make the ask. Some of these other barriers came up. People are intimidated or nervous. So a potential solution here is to let them know you're still learning too. Like we all started somewhere. We all had our first volunteer experience. I am always learning more. I learned from Daniel. I learned from his teammates. I learned from our data director. I learned from the volunteers. So we're all still learning. So that I want that to help lower the intimidation factor. People think that they don't have enough time. Some people don't have enough time. We know that, you know, we have a lot of people who have to work 2 or 3 jobs to provide for their families. And, you know, those are the people that I'm in this fight for. But for some people, we can be creative, right? Let's think about where could you participate even if you don't have large chunks of time. It's real. I think it was Marilyn said, you know, if you've got young kids, if you're raising your young family, your time is really stretched to the limit. But can you jump on a phone bank for an hour? Can you make confirmation calls for me for 30 minutes? You know, there are things that you can do that don't require you giving up a large block of your time. So as somebody who's leading a volunteer team, work with people who are interested and see what solutions you can come up with. Maybe, you know, hey, we need help in the office stapling. Or can you just drop this lit around the houses in your neighborhood? But there is no too young. And you know what? If you knock doors with a baby and or a well-behaved dog, people are going to open that door. Okay, additional barriers here. People who think that they aren't skilled enough. And this is, you know, going back a little bit to the intimidation factor. It's really important for you as a volunteer leader to train your volunteers. Michael talked about having a bad experience. So this is for you now to think about, have I given this volunteer all of the information and tools they need to be successful in this task? It can be real easy for us to take shortcuts and say, hey, I need you to confirm everybody who's coming for this event. Where is the list of the people coming to the event? Should I email, text, call? Do you have a script? How will I record the information? What are the details about the event that I might be asked about? So thinking through all of that as a leader will help your volunteers have the skills and information that they need to succeed. And if somebody's not the perfect fit, like, oh, I don't, you know, this doesn't sound like something I'd be good at. Anything that people can contribute is helpful. So brainstorming, you know, I like to have phone banks as an option for people who maybe are physically unable to knock doors. Phone banks are a good option. If you don't want to knock doors and you don't want to make phone calls, can you be our comfort captain? Can you bring us pizza? Like, be creative. Never volunteered before. You know, this is, there was a little talk in the chat about feeling disconnected from the political process, feeling like we don't have enough power. And the one thing, when I occasionally have those feelings, the one thing I keep reminding myself is that if I feel helpless, if I throw up my hands, that is enabling the powerful and the corrupt to maintain the status quo. And I'm not satisfied with the status quo. I find taking action always makes me feel more powerful, more optimistic, more engaged. So even people who've never volunteered before, you know, be creative and think about ways that they could be involved. They probably don't know what the options are, and some of our jargon can be really intimidating. So I try for volunteers to say knock doors instead of canvas. I didn't know what canvas was. Make calls instead of phone bank. Just some of the even the word choice we can use might help people understand better what's being asked of them. And there are legit time and resource barriers. I'm always very concerned about the technological barriers. We have a lot of fantastic tools that help us work more efficiently and effectively, but I also don't want to leave behind people who aren't as comfortable with technology. So I do invest time in training. You have an opportunity to help train people in person, face to face, and be creative, be patient, and brainstorm ways that people could get involved. I've got 3 pillars here, the building blocks of good recruitment. Step number 1 is to invite people. This is about making the ask. This is that the number 1 reason people don't volunteer is that they haven't been asked. So invite people. Explain what, when, where, how, explain the why, that what you're doing matters and how it contributes. Sometimes it feels like I spent Friday night until, I don't know, 11 p.m. Putting paper name tags in plastic sleeves. And, you know, there are tasks that sometimes it's like, I always laugh and ask which of my colleagues have a poli-sci degree. Who went to college for political science? And here we are, stuffing cardboard into plastic. But all of that stuff contributes. There's always work to be done. So explaining the why that we do some things we do, but invite people, tell them, ask them to join us. Show why the work matters. So whenever I can, if I'm making a volunteer recruitment call in particular, I love to start that call and say, hey, I saw you filled out our interest form, and I can tell you about some of the work we're doing that we would love to have you join us with. But first, I want to hear what motivated you to get involved. I'm going to open that door. It's the best way to start this conversation. When people open up about the values that are important to you, to them, about the issues, about the way good government has positively impacted their lives, or about challenges they're facing that we can potentially help solve through good government. It's a very I enjoy hearing other people's stories, and it's a good way to build a connection, to get to know somebody, learn maybe what parts of this work they're most interested in to try to connect them in ways that will keep them engaged. Follow up. Um, when you have an assignment that you give to a volunteer, follow up afterwards. Whether it's a canvas and you do a debrief, or someone attends your first county meeting and the next week your volunteer coordinator calls everybody who was there who had never come before and said, hey, thank you for joining our meeting. I wanted to reach out and see why you were motivated to join us for the first time, and talk about ways you can get involved. And then when people are given an assignment, and you've coached them well and you've given them the tools they need to do it, follow up and say, hey, how did it go? Were you able to deliver on this task? What can you do next? If they didn't maybe perform the task the way you would have, first of all, that might be okay. Maybe you still got to the same endpoint, you just took different paths. Or maybe you should provide a little bit more coaching and support to that person and say, I'm sorry, you know what? I should have told you that there are blue pens in the closet and you should have used a blue pen. I don't know, whatever it is. But give people feedback, give them opportunities to learn, to grow, to prove themselves, and to be engaged in this process. I'm going to keep going in the interest of time because I'm saying way too many words today. So let's talk about keeping volunteers engaged, and then I will pause for questions. This is something that we say on campaigns, that volunteers come for the cause, they stay for the people. And this is true for you too, that when you recruit a volunteer, whether they continue to engage with you and your county or your candidate comes down to the experience they have. And Michael put something about this in the chat towards the beginning of the session. If volunteers have a bad experience, they're not going to stick around. If they show up to an event and it's poorly run and they stand around twiddling their thumbs for half an hour, they're going to feel like their time wasn't put to good use, and they're going to be less likely to show up next time. So always keep in mind that the experience they have with you plays a huge part in whether they continue to volunteer. So some tips here for keeping volunteers engaged. Building personal relationships, and this goes back to asking people why they got engaged in the first time, for the first time, getting to know them, tell your story of why you are involved and why you do this work, and lead by example. So role model how you would like volunteers to do tasks, how you would like volunteers to eventually lead. You need to live that as well. So don't have higher expectations for other people than you have for yourself. Pitch in and put those pieces of cardboard in the plastic sleeves. There is no task too small in a campaign. That helps really build credibility and trust and respect. Show that you value the work of the volunteers. I like to share results when I can. So I have a volunteer, a couple now actually, who make confirmation calls for my trainings. You might have gotten a confirmation call. And there have been a couple times I was able to run data to say, you know, the calls you made had this impact and got X number of more people to show up to training events over the past month, something like that. Now, of course, there's some information that Daniel and I as staff like have to keep a little close to the chest, but we do like to share the results when we can. So saying thank you, expressing gratitude, let them know that the work we're doing, that they are helping with, that they are doing is important. And again, using their time effectively. So making sure people don't show up to an event and stand around, wander for, 40 minutes, 20 minutes before they know what they should be doing. Confirms. So it is really important to make confirmation calls. If you have an in-person event or a Zoom event, something with a specific time, I am so grateful for the volunteers that I have that make confirmation calls for me, just to make sure people know when, where, be there. If you're giving out some kind of assignment, have your volunteer maybe repeat it back to you. See if they understand it the way that you were trying to convey it. Maybe you haven't relayed it quite adequately. So it's really good to have those expectations. Creating a sense of obligation here. We need our volunteers to do this work. So if volunteers don't show up, if they take on a responsibility and don't follow through, it's difficult for us. So you can make that clear, like, we need you to do this task because 2 days from now we have an event. So letting people know that what they're doing is important and that we are counting on them to keep this machine going. And then after a volunteer event or an assignment, follow up. So for canvases, I coach Canvas captains to debrief at the end of every shift. So gather people together. How did it go? What was the best conversation you had today? Get people's input and feedback in general. I really want to make sure people had a good experience. And if they didn't have a good experience, I want to know why. Is there something I could be doing better to keep volunteers more engaged? Did they miss something? So there was a big event over the weekend, and there was someone who gave me negative feedback on the event. And so I called to say, like, hey, what was the miss? What happened? It turned out we had their wrong phone number. So they hadn't gotten any of our confirmation calls or texts. And they weren't checking their emails, so they hadn't gotten the invitation to the training. So, it was a little bit of feedback for me, a little bit of feedback for that person that they needed to be checking their email. I corrected the phone number. So, I always like to debrief and get that feedback and see what I can do differently to make things better. Okay, with that, I'm going to pause the recording because next I will be sharing some resources that are kind of time-based, so it won't be as relevant in the future. And once I share those, I'll take questions.